Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin analyzing today's Hindu newspaper, an important announcement. As you know, tomorrow is a prelims examination for UPSC 2022. Right after prelims examination at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel, we will bring to you a live discussion on paper 1 of the prelims examination. We will be discussing subject-wise questions, analyzing each and every question, discussing them, and also on the basis of the paper, we will be telling you the expected cutoff for the prelims examination of 2022. So do join in for that session. It will be live on our YouTube channel right at 8 p.m. Also remember, this will be a discussion in Hindi as well as in English. For Hindi, you can tune into our Hindi YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS, and for English, the discussion will be held right here on this channel where you're watching this video right now. Now let's begin our discussion with the first article that raises a very important question. That is, higher education in India needs to be free and high quality. Now, if you look at countries around the world, especially US, the student debt or the student loan issue is a very big political issue. So much so that in the US, the elections are even fought on this particular topic. For example, when the elections were held recently, that is the presidential elections, there were certain candidates such as Bernie Sanders of the Democrat Party who had announced that if I come to power, I will make sure that we cancel all the student debt. That is, the government will pay back all the student debt. However, that has not happened. US, for example, right now has close to $2 trillion of education loans. $1 trillion. And the situation is the same in many other countries, including India. Thus, that in India, we never talk about this because we think that yes, if you have to get good education, especially at the higher education level, you have to pay for it. You cannot expect it to be free. However, there are some interesting examples around the world. Let's see the Nordic nations: Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden. These are the countries that you usually see at the very top whenever we have any index or report talking about the standard of living or happiness index or lack of corruption, etc. The one thing that they all have in common is they provide free of cost higher education to their people. Until very recently, they even gave free of cost higher education to overseas students as well. The students who came from other countries to study in these nations. Now, why do they do so? There are multiple reasons behind it. See, when you go to a higher education college and when you are learning something in that college, it is expected after you pass and you get a degree, you will be an asset for the society. So these countries realize the fact that they want to create an equal, even playing field so that everyone has the right to get quality education, and they don't charge from the students because they know that after the student actually studies from this college and gets a good job, he or she will anyways contribute to the economy by paying taxes. So we don't need to pressurize or burden the student right now. Second reason for this is, let's assume that all of us are in college. Now, after we pass out of college, some of us would want to get into technical jobs, some of us would want to get into some other jobs, but there might be some of us who, let's say, would want to work in the social sector, or let's say I want to open up an NGO. Meaning that I may want to go into those fields which do not pay a very high salary. But right now I can't afford to do that because I know that I have an education loan. So as soon as I pass out of college, my priority is to get the job that pays me the highest. Not the job that I like, not the job that the society needs. But I want a job that pays me the highest because I know I have an education loan that I have to pay back. And that is why we are not allowing the students to explore their full potential and contribute to the society. That is why occupations which won't pay a high amount of salary, be it the social sector, be it helping the poor people, etc., those are seeing lack of talent because people don't want to opt for it because they have spent such a high amount of money in their higher education. And that is what we have to understand. A good example has been said right now recently by the New York University. Now that is why this article is written. New York University's Grossman School of Medicine has just announced that for academic year 2021-22, they will pay the entire tuition fee of all the students in their MD program, regardless of their financial status. They have become the first major American medical school to do that. This has not been seen in India. In India, although government does have certain schools in which you can get free of cost school education, but when it comes to higher education, that is not free. In fact, in higher education, even if you go to government run colleges, be it the IITs or the IIMs, they also charge a huge amount of fee. And that is why it is a big burden on the people. Now, yes, getting education loan in India has become much easier as compared to what it was earlier, but still the student only has to pay back the loan with interest. So there is a big burden. Now, this is the problem statement. Now, what is the solution to it? Now, the one big solution that we have to understand here is either the government has to pitch in or we have to go towards a philanthropy route. Now, philanthropy route means big businesses, rich people, they might come up and contribute to these colleges. Because if you have to have a good higher education quality institute, they require money to run. They require money for all the research, for all the infrastructure that is required to give top quality education. In fact, you might be surprised to know that big universities such as Harvard, etc., get huge amounts of donation. In fact, the kind of reserves that they have may be even larger than some of the GDPs of small nations. That is the amount of donations that they get. In fact, many of these donations go from India only. You would see Tata, Mahindra, many of these organizations actually give a lot of money to institutes such as Harvard because they know that a lot of good quality talent is coming out of those institutes and they actually need money. And that is why they donate all this money to these institutions. Let me give you an example of the Tatas. In 2010, the Tata Group announced that we are giving $50 million gift to Harvard Business School. Why? Because they want that the school should actually produce much more talent and these people will go on and help the society. This was one of the largest grants given to the Harvard Business School. After which, a building in the Harvard campus was actually named the Tata Hall. Similar kind of donations, which may not be of such size, have also been given to Harvard by Mahindra Group, etc. So these kind of philanthropist efforts have been seen by many of these institutions across the world. However, the sad part is that these philanthropists don't really give a lot of money to Indian institutions. There is also a very interesting trend. In the US and Europe, you might see a lot of cases in which when a rich person dies, he or she writes in the will that all my inheritance, the money that I have, the property that I have, I am writing it or giving it to my alma mater. That is the school or the college from where I had studied so that they can utilize it for the upcoming students. That is also not a trend that we see in India. So this is a kind of an idea that has to be explored in India also. And it is not that our rich people don't do that. They do give a lot of money to education, but mostly to higher education institutions in other countries, which has to be redirected towards India as well. As I said, in the US, the student debt loan is a huge issue in their politics, which is not really the case in India. In India, we are more concerned about farmer loans, etc., but the student loan education loan does not really capture our imagination. And we discuss the problems. The main problem being that once a person gets into this debt trap as a student, his or her motto after getting the degree would be just to earn money and not anything more than that. In the US, as you can see, the cost of education has increased considerably year after year. It is extremely hard to go and get a degree from a private not-for-profit college in the US that offer a 4-year course. As we discuss this point, the Indian institutions and the Indian businesses do donate a lot of money. They do a lot of charity, but most of that is directed towards international colleges and universities and not really towards India, which is something that we need to work upon. The next article that we have here is about government's effort to set up a committee that will be empowered to overturn decisions that are taken by the social media platforms on their content. Now, let me give you a brief background about what this issue is. If you remember, the government of India had come up with IT Rules 2021. These were the rules under which the government tried to moderate social media platforms, OTT platforms, YouTube channels, etc. Because before this, there was almost complete freedom to OTT platforms, social media platforms, about what kind of content do they want to publish. And even if someone used to complain that this is false content or this content is against my dignity, etc., there was no legal action taken. So the IT rules of 2021 made these rules that if there is objectionable content or wrong content that is displayed on these platforms, it will be their responsibility to remove this. So this was the overall idea. Now what the government has decided is that over these social media platforms also the government will set up a committee. That for example, let's say I have a problem with Facebook and I say to Facebook that one of the people have published a wrong post about me, I wanted to remove that. So the rules say that Facebook will decide. Now let's say Facebook decided against me and Facebook said that no, we will not remove this post. Now what the government is saying is that I can now go to this government committee and ask them to please get it removed. This government committee will then have the final word over whether or not this content will remain or will it be removed. So there is a committee that is being formed over and above these social media platforms. This is what this article is about, and the article is saying that this is wrong. This should not be done. Yes, there is a need to regulate the social media platforms, but if we do it like this, that is a blatant violation of our democracy. Because as you know, now if such an appeal is filed by people who are from the ruling party or people who are close to the ruling party, then obviously it will be a very biased review of such an appeal. And that is why the government is setting a very, very bad example by making such a committee that will have overarching powers over the social media platforms. Now, do remember, this is just in works, this has not been finalized till now. There, in fact, were issues even when the 2021 IT rules were introduced. The reason is, as the name suggests, these are rules. So, they were not really passed in the parliament, they were just given through an executive order. So, a lot of people had protested even at that time that does the government have the power to bring in so many big rules just by executive order? It rather should have been done through the parliament route by passing a bill. And the same rules now have been amended, so the government does not even have to take permission of the parliament. They can do it within their cabinet itself, which is sending a very, very wrong signal. This is a very short summary of the new IT rules that were introduced in 2021. They were mainly focused on three different aspects: social media platforms, the digital news, that is the news channels that usually run on YouTube, etc., and the OTT platforms. For social media, for example, they said that the social media or Facebook, for example, they have the responsibility to identify the first originator of the content. Now, this is one of the most important points here. See, the social media platforms of late have been used to spread a lot of false news that leads to a lot of issues in the society, including violence in some cases. Now, when one person forwards a WhatsApp message to the other person, the problem is you don't know from where exactly did the message first originate. Who was the person who first wrote that message? That now government says will be the responsibility of the social media platforms. They also would have to appoint a grievance officer that will resolve the complaint within 15 days, and this officer would have to file monthly reports with the government about the complaints that were received and the action that was taken. Now the government is appointing a committee even over this officer to overrule the verdict given by this officer as well. That is what the entire issue is about the new IT rules of 2021. Now, when these rules first came into being, even at that point of time, they were at the center of debate for multiple reasons. As I said, these are rules and not law. There have been people who have been saying, how is it that the government can introduce these rules without any legislative action? The government can do this only through the route of the parliament and not by just passing an order through the cabinet. Secondly, the government is also not giving enough time and enough chances to the intermediaries to actually take down content. The government also needs to understand that it is not really possible and it will be very, very difficult to trace down who was the person who originally made any of the message or content. So to give this responsibility to the social media platforms that they have to identify the actual originator of the message would be a very, very tough task. Then the burden of compliance, monthly reports being sent to the government, and the compliance officer having to resolve all the complaints within 15 days is also very tough, because the platforms that we are talking about have millions and millions of users, and you don't even know how many complaints will be filed if this opens up to the public. Resolving all those complaints within 15 days and then reporting it back to the government might not be the easiest of the task, and the government needs to understand that as well. The next article that we have here is about the US-India trade. Now, this article is saying that recently there have been certain positive developments in the US-India trade. For example, The Indian mangoes were not being sold in the US ever since the pandemic had hit because there were a lot of issues about how exactly is a virus traveling from one country to the other. But now finally the Indian mangoes are back in the US market. This is seen as the result of the success of US India Trade Policy Forum that was able to ensure that there is a diplomatic solution to all these issues. From the US side also, they also want much greater access of the Indian market. For example, USA right now wants to export ethanol and other associated animal feed ingredients which are called the distillers dried grains with solubles to India. They know the fact that India, under its national policy of biofuels, had advanced the E20 blending target by 5 years. If you remember, we had discussed this multiple times that Indian government now wants to mix and blend 20% ethanol in our petrol by 2025. One of the problems in this policy was that we might not have enough quantity of ethanol available for blending. This is where the US wants to come in. The US is saying that we can supply this ethanol once the Indian market is open to us. So the government of US wants greater access to Indian market specifically in terms of biofuel as well. From the Indian side, we also want to export many more things to US, including the Kara beef, also called as a water buffalo meat, table grapes, and also the wild caught shrimps. Shrimps, as you would know, is the largest export of India in terms of aquaculture. So India knows that there is a big market of shrimps in the US and we want to export that. The problem is that US right now has a law that any wild shrimp that is caught in a manner which harms the sea turtles will not be imported in the US. Now, because of this particular law, the Indian shrimps have not been able to be exported to the US, and we have to find some loophole in this law if we have to ensure that Indian shrimps capture the US market. Now, the next meeting of this trade policy forum between India and US will be held in November, where all these issues will be discussed. The four major points of discussion in this group will be agricultural goods, non-agricultural goods, the services and investment, and the issue of intellectual property rights, which US specifically emphasizes a lot on. The US wants greater access to Indian markets for other products as well, including the medical devices, digital trade, etc. On the other hand, India wants resumption of the GSP benefits. As you know, India was a part of the GSP system of the US, also called as Generalized System of Preferences, under which the US had identified certain developing and least developed nations to which the US gave preferential treatment in a manner that the US did not impose taxes on some of the products coming from these nations, which included India as well. It was saving India about $190 million in terms of taxes. But when Donald Trump had become the president, he had taken India out of this system, saying that India does not revert the same to US and India imposes a lot of taxes on US products such as the Harley Davidson super bikes, etc. India wants back in this GSP regime, but this has not been done till now, and hopefully in the coming days this would be done. The good part about India-US trade is, just a week back this was the news that US has become India's largest trading partner and has surpassed China. Now the interesting part is once this news came out, the Chinese government said no, we have calculated and we are still India's largest trading partner. The Chinese government said that our trade with India the last financial year was about $125 billion and American trade was 119. So we are still your largest trading partner. But the Indian government reverted and saying that no, there would have been a mistake in your calculations. We are sure US is our largest trading partner and not China. Now, I'm not sure what China would have gained by proving that they are our largest trading partner. But the fact is that China just wants to come in between of anything that the Indian government is saying, even if it does not really bother them. Now, there are certain challenges in India-US trade. If we get rid of these, the potential in India-US trade is much bigger as compared to what the current numbers suggest. Some of the challenges include the tariff imposition problem. This especially came to light when Donald Trump was a US president, because Donald Trump was following this policy that any country that does not give US tax exemptions, the US will also impose higher taxes on them. That is why in 2018, US imposed a 25% tariff on certain steel products and 10% tariff on certain aluminium products that came from India. India also had to retaliate the same, and we imposed similar kind of taxes on US imports as well. Because of this, as expected, the steel exports have declined to the US considerably because of these high taxes. And we have been urging with the new US government to change this, but this has not been done. The other problem is that India's Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign is being seen by the US as a protectionist campaign, as a campaign which goes against the concept of globalization, which US does not really appreciate. We had also discussed the fact that we are not a part of the GSP anymore and we want entry into that regime once again. It was Donald Trump that excluded India from the GSP regime. The other issue is that US does not appreciate India carrying out trade with some of the nations with which US does not have great relations. Be it Iran, be it Russia. Whenever we talk about trade with Russia, for example, the mention of CATSA and the possible sanctions actually takes up all the limelight. This is also something that we have to come to terms with, and US must understand that as a sovereign nation, India needs the right to take its own decisions, be it in terms of trade or any other bilateral diplomacy. The next article that we have here is on a topic that we did discuss a few days back, which is about the Indian government's new draft rules about how the recycling of electronic waste will happen. Now, as you know, with a growing population and growing number of people using electronics in India, India produces some of the largest amount of e-waste in the entire world. And recycling those e-waste is always a challenge. It can be dangerous, it requires a lot of investment, and it also requires the government to make a sound policy about that. Recently, the government of India had made a policy under which at least 60% of the electronics that is generated by a company, they have to recycle it. And the target will then increase to 70% by 2023 and then 80% further later on. Now, what this has done is this has actually opened up a lot of opportunities for the people who run e-waste recycling plants. So the companies who run plants where they recycle e-waste, now they are looking at a very, very bright future. Now, as per these rules, what will happen is these e-waste recyclers, they will recycle electronic waste. For example, let's say there is an e-waste recycler who recycles 500 kg of electronic waste. Now, the recycling means they will take out whatever useful material that they can and then they will sell it. And then the remaining part they will recycle. Then these recyclers will contact the Central Pollution Control Board and tell them that, see, I have recycled this much. Central Pollution Control Board then will give them a certificate. These are called EPR certificates. That is Extended Producer Responsibility Certificates. In this certificate, it would be written that yes, this particular company has recycled 500 kg of waste. Now, the next point is, let's say I'm an electronics company. Let's say I'm Philips. Now, in one single year, let's just assume for the sake of argument that I sold electronics which were about 10,000 kg. Now, the government is saying that I have to recycle at least 60% of this. So, I have to recycle at least 6,000 kg of this. Now, what do? I don't have to recycle it myself. I just have to buy these certificates from these recycling companies worth 6,000 kg and then show it to the government. So, these certificates will be traded in the market, and these certificates can only be obtained from the CPCB. That is the entire idea behind the guideline. Also, when the recyclers actually extract some useful material from this e-waste and they sell it in the market, they will have to pay GST on that to the government as well. Now, this is the entire idea. The problem in this entire idea is that how exactly would the CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, verify how much waste was recycled? The experts are saying that it is almost next to impossible for the CPCB to actually identify how much electronic waste was recycled. So issuing these certificates by ensuring that they have cross-checked the number of recycled waste will be very, very difficult. If this is something that we are able to manage, it would be a very successful policy, but the entire problem will be about verifying these certificates. Also, these recycling plants can go directly to the companies also and say that we want to sell you these certificates, give us this and this money. Alternatively, they can also trade this in the market. Whichever company wants to give them a higher price for these certificates, the certificates can be sold to them. Now, what if a company, let's say Philips, is not able to get these certificates? Then what will happen? Then they will have to give a penalty to the government. The government is saying that in the next year, if you exceed your target, then we will refund a part of your penalty. So that is how this policy is. It has not come into force till now. This is still open for public consultation. But thus the report has ensured that a lot of recycling plant companies are now putting a lot more investment in their e-cycling plant, and they are now ensuring that in the coming days they will be able to recycle a lot more of it. Now this also gives us a chance to talk about the CPCB. There have been multiple questions asked on CPCB in a prelims examination. It is a statutory body that came into being in 1974 under the Water Act. Do remember this. The full name is Water Prevention and Control of the Pollution Act. As the name suggests, the responsibility is mainly to control pollution in India, to promote the cleanliness of streams, wells in different areas of the states by preventing, controlling and abatement of water pollution. They also have been given the charge under the Air Act of 1981. So they have to improve the quality of air, prevent, control and abate air pollution in the country. This is the major responsibility of CPCB, which is a statutory body. These were all the topics we wanted to discuss on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Evaluate the idea of tradable extended producer responsibility certificates for the purpose of giving a push to electronic waste recycling in India. Also point out towards the challenges associated with this idea. Second, what are the biggest impediments in India-US trade? Suggest ways to overcome the same. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.